was more than a boutique. It was a social filter dressed in marble and glass. Every inch of it screamed silent judgment. The hushed jazz, the scent of rare oud, the way the lighting hit the dresses like they were holy relics. But beneath the polished luxury, there was an unspoken law. Only those who looked the part were allowed in. No signs were needed. The stairs did the job. And the enforcer of these invisible rules? Francesca Delacroix, the manager with eyes sharper than any security system. She didn't greet you, she scanned you. Shoes first, then bag, then posture. If your heels weren't designer or your watch wasn't whispering wealth, you were labeled not our kind before you even touched a hanger. Francesca wasn't cruel with words. She didn't need to be. Her power was in suggestion, her elegance a weapon. Can I help you find something more casual? Always meant, you don't belong here. She saw luxury not as art, but as armor, meant to protect the elite from the ordinary. But Francesca's empire of appearances was about to clash with someone who refused to play by the rules. Eleanor Moore stepped into Le Diamant like a breeze slipping through armor, silent, effortless, unreadable. She wore a light gray coat, clean white sneakers, and black sunglasses that covered more than just her eyes. They hid her story. Her skin was a rich bronze, her hair pulled into a tight bun, and she carried no purse, no jewelry, no signal of wealth. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tourist. But what no one knew was that Elena once ruled an empire. She was the former CEO of Aurelia Group, the design firm behind Europe's most opulent spaces. She left it all behind after a scandalous divorce from a billionaire that turned her life into tabloid fuel. Now she lived quietly by choice. Francesca didn't blink. One glance was all it took. The door had barely clicked shut behind the woman when her brain issued a verdict as sharp as her stilettos. Not a client. Her eyes scanned Elena Moore with surgical precision, moving from the spotless but unbranded sneakers to the soft gray coat that whispered comfort. Not couture. No designer handbag, no statement jewelry, no signs of nervousness or effort to impress. And that, to Francesca, was the biggest offense of all. If you weren't trying to be seen in Le Diamant, then why were you here? She watched the woman move, calm, casual, unhurried, and every cell in Francesca's body recoiled. This wasn't the stride of a wealthy regular or a new money debutante. This was a woman with no intent to prove herself, which meant one thing: waste of time. The judgment happened silently but with lethal clarity. Francesca didn't need confirmation from anyone. She had built her reputation on these snap calls, spotting the serious from the strays. And Elena, in Francesca's mind, was the latter: a stray, a drifter. A woman who wandered in off Rodeo Drive to marvel at what she couldn't touch. The kind who might pretend to shop, maybe even dare to try something on, only to vanish before the card machine ever beeped. She had no stylist, no assistant, no obvious appointment. No one called ahead, no limo waited outside. To Francesca, that wasn't mystery. It was mediocrity. And mediocrity had no place in her store. Without saying a word, Francesca sent a silent signal to her staff. Subtle, practiced, unkind. Watch her. Don't engage. She won't buy. She doesn't belong. Elena moved slowly between the displays, her steps soft, her gaze steady. She didn't rush. She didn't reach out impulsively. Instead, she paused in front of each piece with quiet appreciation, examining the stitching, the cut, the balance of color and silhouette. Her fingers hovered inches away from the fabric, never touching, just observing, like someone who truly understood craftsmanship. She wasn't there to impress. She wasn't there to flaunt. And that's what made her so unsettling in Francesca's eyes. Elena didn't look around nervously. She didn't try to make conversation. She simply existed in the space like she had every right to be there. And to Francesca, that was unacceptable. In a place where wealth was worn like armor, someone moving with quiet confidence and no visible status was a threat. Francesca watched her for another moment, then smoothed her blazer and stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble as she approached. Each step rehearsed, her expression perfectly composed. She wore her usual smile, welcoming on the surface, but hollow if you looked too long. "Good afternoon," she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough volume to remind the room who was in control. Elena turned slightly, nodded in greeting, her expression calm. "Finding everything all right?" Francesca continued, hands clasped loosely in front of her. She glanced down at Elena's sneakers, just long enough to make the meaning clear. Elena gave a polite smile. "Just looking." There was a pause, a breath. Then Francesca leaned in, her voice soft, but her words sharpened like glass. "If I may," she said, gesturing gently toward the entrance, "you might enjoy one of our sister stores just a few blocks down on 3rd Avenue. They carry more casual pieces, much easier to wear." She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Every syllable was calculated, wrapped in courtesy, delivered like a velvet-coated insult. The tone said it all. "You don't belong here. Try somewhere less refined." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But something in her eyes shifted, barely, but enough to register. She had been judged, sized up, and dismissed before opening her mouth. Not because of what she said, not because of what she did, but simply because she didn't look expensive enough to be taken seriously. Elena continued walking slowly between the racks, her steps even, her breathing steady. She paused at a navy coat with a hand-stitched lining and lifted the price tag gently. $42,000. She said nothing. She wasn't shocked, not by the price, not by the quality, and certainly not by the way she was being treated. What she noticed wasn't in the clothing. It was in the details they thought she'd miss. The woman seated on the velvet bench to her left had been handed a glass of champagne the moment she sat down. Offered without asking, with a smile and a quiet, "Miss Caldwell, welcome back." Another assistant rushed to place her shopping bags neatly by her side, calling her by name like she was royalty returning from battle. Elena, meanwhile, had been inside for nearly 10 minutes. No one had greeted her. No one had even asked if she'd like water. She hadn't been looked in the eye once since the manager's thinly veiled suggestion that she go somewhere more casual. But Elena wasn't offended. She was aware, sharply, painfully aware. She knew what this was, what it had always been. The kind of quiet exclusion that dressed itself in manners and smiled while shutting the door in your face. She didn't need them to say it. The message was clear. You're not one of us. Her clothes didn't scream wealth. Her walk didn't beg attention. And in a place like Le Diamant, that made her invisible. But what they didn't realize, what they never seemed to realize, was that Elena didn't need their validation. She wasn't searching for acceptance. She wasn't there to impress anyone. What she was doing, in fact, was watching, closely, quietly, intentionally. And what she saw only confirmed what she already knew. In places like this, respect wasn't given freely. It was rationed, carefully, strategically, offered only to those who looked the part. Her eyes scanned the room like a slow-moving camera, catching every nuance. The subtle shift in tone when a white man asked a question and received a detailed, cheerful response. The way a younger staff member hesitated before looking in her direction, then quickly busied herself with folding scarves that didn't need folding. Every gesture, every omission, every carefully polite insult was recorded in her mind. Not with anger, but with clarity. And through it all, Elena never lost her smile. Not because she was unaffected, but because she had learned long ago, smiling was her shield, quiet was her weapon, and memory was her revenge. But not everyone in the boutique was blind to what was happening. From behind the counter, Emily watched in silence. She was only a few weeks into her internship at Le Diamant, still learning the choreography of luxury, the smiles, the scripts, the unspoken rules. Her blazer was slightly too big, her heels uncomfortable, and her confidence still shaky. But she had good instincts, and something about what she was seeing didn't feel right. She had noticed the champagne that was never offered, the greetings that skipped over Elena, the polite avoidance wrapped in expensive fabric and perfect posture. She glanced at Francesca, who stood just a few steps away, her face calm, her stance proud, as if the way she dismissed someone so quietly was part of the boutique's design. Emily swallowed hard. She had admired Francesca's elegance. Until now. For the first time, she began to question everything she'd been told. The client profiles, the idea of protecting the brand, the subtle training that taught her who deserved attention and who didn't. It was all framed as strategy, as discretion. But today it looked more like cruelty wearing silk gloves. Emily looked at Elena again, still calm, still polite, still invisible, and it stung. Not because Elena reacted, but because she didn't. Because she had clearly been through this before, and no one had ever stopped it. Emily's hands fidgeted at her sides. She wanted to say something, anything, but she didn't know how to step out of the script she had been taught, the one where silence meant professionalism, where watching someone be excluded was just part of a normal day. But in that moment, something inside her shifted, and once it moved, it wouldn't go back. And then, without asking permission or glancing around for approval, Elena reached for the dress. The black one. It wasn't just any dress. It was the dress. The centerpiece of that week's collection. Pure silk, hand-stitched in Paris, tailored for form without apology. Its price tag read $39,800, but no one dared mention the number aloud. It wasn't for sale to just anyone. It was displayed at an angle with deliberate lighting that made the fabric shimmer like still water. Most customers looked at it from a distance. Some asked. Few tried it. And yet here was Elena, standing in front of it in sneakers and a gray coat, fingers lightly grazing the hanger like she had every right in the world to do so. She didn't grab it. She didn't hesitate. She lifted it from the rack with calm, fluid motion, like someone trained in detail, not show. She turned it slightly toward the light and examined the stitching as if she knew exactly what she was looking at. She did. Across the room, Francesca froze mid-conversation. Her eyes locked onto Elena with silent alarm, the kind that came from years of protecting status like a secret recipe. She excused herself politely from the client beside her, but her expression had already shifted. Her jaw tightened behind the smile. Her footsteps, though measured, carried weight. As she approached, she smoothed her blazer, preparing for what she thought would be a gentle correction. But inside, her irritation flared. That dress wasn't just fabric. It was a silent contract, one she never intended to offer to someone who walked in unannounced, unstyled, and unimpressed. To her, this wasn't just about clothing. It was about control. Francesca stopped just beside Elena, close enough to invade her space, but far enough to maintain the illusion of courtesy. "That piece," she said, her voice like honey over ice, "is quite special." Elena glanced sideways but said nothing. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just holding a dress. Francesca continued, her tone soft, but each word more pointed than the last. "It's part of a limited collection, very rare, designed for women who understand the art of movement, posture, presence." She gave a brief, practiced laugh, as if trying to make it sound like a compliment. "It's not just about wearing it, it's about becoming it." Her eyes swept from Elena's casual outfit to her calm expression, and then rested on her face. "Some silhouettes require a particular kind of elegance. Not everyone," she added lightly, "can bring that to life." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like broken glass. There was nothing random about them. They were chosen, precise, each one layered with condescension so delicate it would almost pass as customer service, if it weren't so transparently cruel. Around them, the boutique seemed to pause. Emily, standing near the accessories wall, turned slightly, sensing something wasn't right. A client on the couch stopped scrolling her phone and glanced up. No one spoke, but everyone heard it. Francesca had drawn a line, clean, polite, merciless, and Elena was standing on the wrong side of it. But instead of shrinking away, Elena responded, softly, steadily, and with a precision that landed like a quiet bomb. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry or offended. In fact, she looked almost at ease, as if nothing about this situation surprised her. Still holding the black dress with careful fingers, she turned slightly to face Francesca more fully and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "Actually, I designed the interior for Givenchy's Milan showroom, the new one on Via Sant'Andrea." Her tone was gentle, unimpressed, not defensive, just factual, like she was stating the weather. But the weight of those words stopped Francesca cold. Her breath caught for half a beat. It wasn't what Elena said, it was how she said it. No bragging, no effort, just truth. And that made it impossible to ignore. For a split second, Francesca's perfectly controlled face betrayed her. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. She blinked once, tight, fast, then gave a polite laugh, the kind that people use when their pride starts to slip. "Oh," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "That must be a coincidence. Same name, maybe." It was a weak deflection, and they both knew it. She didn't ask a follow-up question, didn't request clarification, because deep down she realized she might have made a mistake, but she refused to give Elena the satisfaction of watching her admit it. Francesca had built her entire image on always knowing who people were the moment they walked in. And this woman, this calmly spoken, simply dressed woman, had just shattered that illusion with one sentence. Elena didn't react. She didn't smirk, didn't correct her again. She simply looked at Francesca the way one might look at a child pretending to be taller. Not unkindly, just with clarity. That look said more than words ever could. "I see exactly what you're doing, and it no longer works on me." Around them, the boutique carried on, music playing softly, glassware clinking faintly as champagne was poured elsewhere. But the energy had shifted. It was no longer Francesca holding the frame of the conversation. She had lost control, even if only for a moment. And Elena had taken nothing but the truth to do it. Emily, from a distance, saw it all. The way Francesca stiffened. The way her smile faltered for just a breath too long. And the way Elena didn't have to do anything dramatic to reclaim the dignity that had quietly been stripped from her the moment she walked through the door. It was one of the first times Emily saw power move without force, and she couldn't unsee it. Neither could Francesca. Just as Francesca was trying to piece her control back together, still clinging to her forced smile, still pretending not to feel the shift, Le Diamant's entrance door rotated with a slow, weighty hush, like the start of something no one could stop. The sound was soft, but it broke the boutique's curated calm like a crack across glass. Everyone turned instinctively, even those who had trained themselves never to appear curious. Time didn't stop, but it slowed. Through the last turn of the revolving glass stepped a woman who didn't just enter the room. She commanded it. Jasmine Crockett, civil rights attorney, nationally recognized. Sharp as a blade and twice as fast. Her tailored violet suit fit like armor, the clean lines of the jacket drawing a perfect silhouette of someone who never once doubted her place in a room. Her black pumps hit the marble with a rhythm that felt intentional, every click echoing like punctuation in a courtroom. She wasn't rushed, she wasn't angry, but she was here, and her presence made everyone suddenly feel exposed. Her eyes, focused and unblinking, swept across the boutique like a litmus test for truth. She didn't look around for permission. She looked for the problem, and she found it instantly. On one side of the boutique, clients sipping champagne, chatting in muted tones, assistants circling like orbiting moons. On the other, Elena, standing alone, dress in hand, untouched, unwelcomed, unacknowledged. Jasmine saw it in one glance. She didn't need an explanation. She didn't need context. She had seen it before, in boardrooms, in bank lobbies, in courtrooms dressed as neutral. That quiet, polished exclusion wrapped in good lighting and soft jazz. And so, she stopped. Just a few steps inside the door. She didn't rush toward her sister. She didn't make a scene. She planted her feet like a judge entering chambers, tilted her chin slightly and let her voice cut the air clean in half. "Is someone in here refusing to serve my sister?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The force was in her clarity. The boutique didn't breathe. Not a word, not a step. Jasmine had asked the question, and no one dared answer. She didn't need one. The silence was its own confession. Without missing a beat, she stepped forward, not quickly, not theatrically, but with a calm force that carried the weight of justice and authority. Her heels tapped against the marble floor like a metronome, counting down to something irreversible. She walked past glass displays and stunned clients like they didn't exist. Her eyes never left Elena. The tension in the room wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. Jasmine didn't look left or right. She didn't acknowledge the stares, the whispers, the rising panic radiating off Francesca like heat from a flame. She had come for one person, and she didn't come to ask questions twice. When she reached Elena, she stopped just inches in front of her. Their eyes met, and for the first time since Elena entered the boutique, her guard softened, not because she needed rescuing, but because someone she trusted had finally arrived. Jasmine leaned in, wrapped her arms around her, and pulled her into a firm, quiet hug. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for show. It was real, protective, grounding, and completely unshakable. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice low and even. "Did I get here in time?" There was no fear in her tone, no anger, just precision, as if she already knew the answer, but wanted to give Elena the chance to speak it herself. And in that moment, the boutique, this cathedral of curated silence, held its breath like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Francesca didn't move. Her body was frozen, jaw tight, shoulders locked in place, her mind scrambling for a response she didn't have. Her authority, so absolute just minutes ago, was now slipping through her fingers like sand. She didn't know where to look: at Jasmine, whose presence threatened to collapse everything, or at Elena, whose silence had become more powerful than any raised voice. A seated VIP leaned in toward her companion and whispered, breath shaky, "That's Jasmine Crockett." The name didn't need explanation. It landed with impact. The woman who took down discriminatory corporations. The one who made headlines for turning legal battles into public reckonings. Recognition rippled through the room like electricity. One by one, clients began to understand the weight of what they were witnessing. Phones were now subtly lifted behind handbags. Eyes darted between the three women, one silent, one crumbling, one in control. Francesca's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. No script had prepared her for this. She wasn't just facing a difficult client anymore. She was facing someone who had power in a language she couldn't fake. Truth. And Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. All she had done was walk across the room and ask a question. But that question, simple, direct, undeniable, had turned the floor beneath Francesca into glass. And everyone in the boutique was waiting to see if it would crack. The hug broke, but the silence didn't. Jasmine stepped back, her body still between Elena and the rest of the room. And that's when she turned. Her head tilted slightly, her posture straight, voice calm and crystal clear. "Do you know who she is?" Jasmine asked, eyes locked onto Francesca with unshakable precision. Her tone wasn't loud, but it rang through the boutique like a hammer on glass. "Do you even care who she is?" Francesca opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her throat clenched, her eyes flicking to Elena, then to the staff, then back to Jasmine, looking for an exit that wasn't there. Jasmine didn't wait. "That's Elena Moore," she continued, pacing forward a single step, her voice still composed, but hardening like cooling steel. "Former CEO of the Aurelia Group, the woman who designed showrooms for Givenchy, Balmain, and two of the top luxury hotels in Europe." Murmurs rippled through the room like static. Heads turned. Some mouths hung open. One VIP client leaned forward slightly, suddenly alert. Jasmine didn't flinch. "And today," she said, eyes narrowing, "you dismissed her. You ignored her. You patronized her. Why? Because she wore sneakers? Because she didn't announce her net worth at the door?" She stepped closer. "Or was it something else?" Now her voice dropped lower, more deliberate, each syllable heavy with intent. "Was it because she's a black woman who doesn't walk in here dripping with labels? Was that too complicated for your definition of luxury?" Francesca's lips parted in reflex, hands rising as if to gesture something soft, something safe. I wasn't aware," she stammered, voice dry, thin, breaking under pressure. "We have certain service standards. Guidelines, really. I was just following protocol." Her breath hitched as she tried to regain footing. "It's about protecting the experience for our clientele. We've always been selective. That's all." Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was razor sharp, measured, and deadly quiet. "Selective," she repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. So that's what we're calling it now. She stepped forward again, not aggressively, but with the unwavering calm of someone trained to dismantle lies for a living. You know, the law used to have standards too. Rules about who could sit at the front of a bus, who could enter through which door, who could buy property where. They were all called policy until people stood up and named them for what they really were: discrimination. The last word landed with finality, and the room felt it. Even the air seemed to hold still. Francesca's face lost its color. She tried to speak, but Jasmine raised a hand, not rudely, just enough to stop her. "You didn't just misjudge a client," she said, voice now quiet enough to make people lean in. "You revealed something deeper, something ugly. And the worst part? You still don't think you did anything wrong. That's the real luxury here, isn't it? The privilege to offend and call it procedure." Behind her, Emily, the young intern, looked like she was holding her breath. One of the other associates slowly placed the champagne tray down, hands trembling just slightly. Jasmine glanced around the boutique, scanning the silent audience of stunned clients and tense staff. "Let me guess," she said, gesturing slightly toward the others. "She didn't fit the image, didn't perform the part. No high heels, no flashy watch. So she was invisible to you. Disposable." She turned her eyes back to Francesca. "But let me ask you this. If the roles were reversed, if someone like Elena had walked in here in your clothes and you stood there in sneakers, would you have treated her the same way?" Francesca froze. Completely. Her mouth hung open, words caught behind fear and pride. Her silence finally said everything. Jasmine let the silence sit, let the room feel it. Then she stepped back toward Elena, not looking away from Francesca until the last possible second. "You don't get to define elegance," she said, now speaking to the room as much as to Francesca. "You don't get to decide who deserves respect based on a pair of shoes." Her voice softened, but the edge stayed. "And you definitely don't get to gatekeep dignity with a name tag and a tight smile." That line cut through the boutique like a clean blade. One woman near the dressing room quietly put down the dress she had been holding. Another pulled her phone out from under her clutch, clearly recording. Francesca, still frozen, looked like a statue under direct light, beautiful, brittle, and dangerously close to cracking. Her hands clenched the clipboard in front of her, like it might save her. Her carefully applied foundation couldn't mask the flush rising beneath her skin. Her mouth moved, but there was nothing left to say. No defense that wouldn't sound ridiculous. No explanation that wouldn't make it worse. And Jasmine just stood there unbothered, because she had already won. Not through volume, not through aggression, but by speaking truth clearly, without apology. That was her weapon, and in that room it was more powerful than any brand name in sight. Jasmine turned to Elena again, her voice dropping to something almost tender. "You ready to leave this place?" Elena gave a soft smile, barely nodding, and that was the final blow. Because even without a single raised voice, Francesca had been dismantled, exposed not as elegant, but as hollow, and no dress in that boutique could ever cover that. The silence that followed Jasmine's words wasn't peaceful. It was devastating. And then finally someone moved. Across the room, a woman in a white designer pantsuit, diamond earrings, sleek blowout, the kind of client Francesca usually catered to like royalty, stood up from the velvet sofa. She didn't look rushed. She didn't even look angry. She looked disappointed, and that made it worse. She placed her untouched champagne flute on the marble table beside her, adjusted her cufflink, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't spend my money in places that don't respect people." Her voice was calm but firm, echoing through the boutique like a final judgment. Then she turned and walked out, slowly, deliberately, with the posture of someone who knew others would follow. Francesca stood frozen, her mouth open slightly as if to call out, to explain, to spin, but no words came. She looked around, hoping for support, but the boutique had turned. The energy had shifted. The image she had built, flawless, untouchable, elite, was collapsing under the weight of one truth. She had been seen, truly seen, and the room no longer admired her for it. More whispers rippled behind clothing racks. Another customer rose, checking her phone, eyes wide. Someone at the entrance nudged their partner, then opened the door to leave. It had started, the unraveling, and Francesca could feel it in her chest like a scream that hadn't yet made it to her throat. Behind the register, Emily stood perfectly still, heart pounding in her ears. Her hands were shaking, but her decision had already been made. Slowly, she reached up and unclipped her name tag, the same tag she had been proud of just weeks ago. She stared at it for a moment, then walked to the counter. Her heels felt heavier with every step, but her voice was clear when she placed the tag on the polished surface. "I didn't go to school to become part of this," she said softly, but everyone heard her. "I'm not here to help humiliate people." Then she looked directly at Elena, not at Francesca, and gave her a small, apologetic nod, one filled with shame and with quiet courage. No one stopped her, not a single person, not even Francesca, who now looked like a statue, still standing but lifeless. Emily walked past her manager without a glance, past the silent assistants, past the still recording phones. She walked out the door without slamming it, without tears. Just a clean, straight exit that somehow made more noise than a full-blown scene, the kind of exit you don't forget. Back inside, a soft chime sounded, a notification from someone's phone, then another, and another. In seconds, the boutique was buzzing, but not with business, with footage. Someone had recorded the confrontation, from the moment Jasmine stepped inside to the second the client walked out. The video was now spreading, already posted, already reposted. The boutique's name was in the caption. So was Francesca's. And Elena's quiet defiance, Jasmine's voice, Emily's resignation. All of it, captured, real, unfiltered. And as the boutique's air turned heavy with tension and glowing screens, one thing became clear to everyone still inside. This moment wasn't staying inside these walls. And as the screens glowed with truth and the boutique crumbled in slow silence, the three women turned toward the door. They didn't speak. They didn't rush. There was no dramatic walkout. Just quiet, deliberate movement, like a verdict being carried out. Elena placed the black silk dress back on the rack without a word. Jasmine gave Francesca one last look. No hatred, just the cold clarity of someone who expected better and was done asking. Emily followed 2 steps behind, no longer staff, no longer silent. As they walked past the other clients, no one dared make eye contact. A few pretended to check their phones. One assistant shifted nervously, holding a hanger that suddenly felt too heavy. The glass doors opened without resistance, and they stepped into the daylight. Behind them, Francesca stood still, frozen, her mouth slightly open, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked like she might speak, but nothing came. There were no apologies that could matter now, no procedures to hide behind, just silence, and the sound of her kingdom collapsing brick by invisible brick. For a woman who had ruled every inch of that boutique like a throne room, the stillness left behind by their departure was louder than anything she'd ever heard, and it wouldn't leave with them. It would stay, in every mirror, in every whisper, in every single notification, lighting up her phone. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed, horns sounded. People laughed somewhere down the block. But for the 3 women who had just stepped out of the curated cage of Le Diamant, everything felt still. Jasmine took a breath, then exhaled slowly, releasing the tension she'd carried across that marble floor like armor. Elena walked a few more paces, her expression unreadable, until they turned a corner and stopped in front of a small cafe. It wasn't glamorous. No velvet booths, no champagne service, no chandeliers, just wood tables, fresh air, and the smell of real coffee. They sat down at a table near the window, sun warming their faces. Emily hesitated, then pulled out a chair across from them. She looked lost for a moment, between pride and guilt, relief and shock. Jasmine ordered 3 coffees without asking anyone what they wanted. She knew. Elena smiled gently. It wasn't forced, it was quiet, earned. The kind of smile that came not from victory, but from surviving something ugly with grace intact. Emily wrapped her hands around her cup as if trying to keep her world from shaking. For a while, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Jasmine finally broke it, leaning back in her chair, eyes half lidded with exhaustion, but still burning with clarity. Status, she said, voice steady, isn't measured by labels. She glanced at Elena, then at Emily. It's measured by how you treat people when you think no one's watching? Her tone wasn't angry. Just true. Simple and sharp. Like truth should be. Emily blinked hard, then nodded once. She looked down, then looked up again. I always thought I had to choose between kindness and professionalism, she said softly. But today, I saw what happens when you stay silent too long. Elena reached over and gently touched her hand. Just a moment of connection, wordless, grounding. You didn't stay silent today, she said. You stood up. That's more than most ever do. Emily's eyes welled, but she smiled. That smile, the one that happens when shame starts to turn into strength. Jasmine stirred her coffee slowly, watching the swirls settle. Francesca will spin it, she said flatly. She'll say it was a misunderstanding, training error, isolated incident. She'll try to save the store. Elena nodded once. Let her. She sipped her drink. People like that need the story to be neat, but we don't owe them a clean ending. She looked out the window for a beat. We just owe them the truth. Across the street, life continued. A man bought flowers. A kid rode by on a scooter. Somewhere, Francesca's phone was vibrating again, probably with calls she didn't want to answer. Probably with headlines she couldn't spin fast enough. The footage had already gone viral. Jasmine's voice, Elena's silence, Emily's resignation, they were all over the timeline, and no one could unsee it. No one could unhear it. Back at the table, Emily finally exhaled, her shoulders dropping like she'd just set down a weight too heavy to name. So, what now? She asked, barely above a whisper. Jasmine looked at Elena. Elena looked at the sky, then back to Emily. Now, Elena said, you get to rebuild on your own terms. Jasmine smiled. And if you ever want to help tear down what shouldn't be standing in the first place, call us. They laughed, not loudly, not recklessly, but with that kind of laughter that breaks the final tension. The kind that says, we made it, not unscarred, but unbroken. And as they sat there, three women from different places, different stages, bonded by one ugly moment turned powerful. They didn't look like victims or revolutionaries or anything in between. They just looked like women who chose to remember what dignity really meant. And in that tiny cafe, without a single logo in sight, they looked more powerful than anything sold behind glass. But while Elena, Jasmine, and Emily sat quietly in the cafe, reclaiming their dignity away from the noise, the rest of the world was just beginning to hear what had happened inside Le Diamant. It started with one post, a 41-second clip filmed on shaky phone footage, capturing Jasmine Crockett's calm, devastating confrontation, and Elena standing tall in silence beside her. The caption read simply, "This is what quiet racism looks like in luxury." Within minutes, it had over 10,000 shares. By the time they finished their coffee, the video had already reached 1 million views. It hit TikTok, then Twitter, then Instagram like a digital avalanche. Reactions poured in from every corner of the internet. Some were furious, others were stunned, but all of them felt something shift. The video was dissected frame by frame. People zoomed in on Francesca's expression as Jasmine asked, "Do you even care who she is?" They posted side-by-side images of Elena's quiet composure against the boutique's marble backdrop. Influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is why I stopped shopping in places that only treat you well if you scream money." Fashion bloggers chimed in, designers, activists. The clip had become more than viral content. It had become a mirror, and it was forcing people to look at themselves. Then came the hashtag, #respect is luxury, simple, director, and suddenly everywhere. A former Vogue editor shared it with a caption about being followed inside a boutique in Paris. A black supermodel wrote, "I've walked runways in Milan and still been ignored in stores where my face hangs in the window." Actors, CEOs, stylists, hotel managers, people from every part of the industry began posting their own stories. The stories were different, but the pattern was the same. Dressed too casually, not served. Looked too ordinary, treated like a nuisance. Too quiet, too brown, too plain, therefore invisible. The movement exploded. People didn't just retweet the video, they added their own footage, old clips from other boutiques, audio recordings of staff making comments they thought would never be heard, photos of receipts alongside stories of being ignored until a card was shown, and all of it began to circle back to one name, Francesca Delacroix. At first, Le Diamant released a short statement. It was as cold and calculated as Francesca herself. We are reviewing internal policies to ensure all guests feel welcome. The internet wasn't having it. The comments section flooded instantly. You didn't fail to make her feel welcome. You made her feel unwelcome on purpose. Someone even created a side-by-side meme of Francesca's robotic smile next to a mannequin with the caption, "Which one's warmer?" Then came the real fire. Journalists started digging. An independent fashion reporter went back through customer reviews of Le Diamant over the last 5 years. Most were glowing, but a few, buried, filtered out, told a different story. One review from a year ago. They wouldn't let me try on a jacket until I showed my ID and mentioned my husband was an investor. Another, I walked in with my cousin who wasn't wearing makeup. She got side-eyed the whole time while I was treated like royalty. And then the names started surfacing. People who had been quietly silenced, subtly excluded, just like Elena. A popular podcast dropped an emergency episode titled "The Boutique Built on Judgment." Within it, a former employee of Le Diamant, speaking anonymously, revealed that Francesca trained her staff to read the room before they smile. That same staffer described an internal code, QF, short for question fit, used to describe customers who didn't look the part. The internet seized it immediately. Screenshots were shared. Commentators called it corporate profiling in couture. The story was no longer about one incident. It was about a system. News anchors ran the video in prime time. Morning shows replayed the audio of Jasmine saying, "You don't get to gatekeep dignity with a name tag and a tight smile." The line became a rallying cry. Protesters stood outside the boutique the next day, wearing shirts that read, "Dignity isn't designer." A small crowd gathered by noon. By evening, there were news trucks parked across the street. Reporters jostled for quotes. Someone printed life-size cardboard cutouts of Elena and Jasmine and placed them at the boutique entrance. No one from Le Diamant came out. The backlash spread faster than PR could control. Francesca's name began trending by itself. People scoured LinkedIn, trying to confirm her background. One fashion blogger found an old press interview where Francesca said, "Luxury should feel earned. Not everyone understands that." That line alone was enough to set the internet ablaze again. One Twitter post replied, translation, "If you don't look rich enough, we won't waste our time." By that night, dozens of celebrities had posted solidarity photos with the hashtag. Even competitors of Le Diamant began making statements, distancing themselves. Some offered public apologies for past moments of gatekeeping. But it was too late for Francesca. She hadn't just lost control of the store, she'd lost control of the narrative. The story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Elena's silence, to Jasmine's voice, to Emily's resignation, to the millions of people who saw something familiar in a 41-second clip of quiet humiliation and public reckoning. Francesca's past, once polished and perfectly curated, was now under full audit. And the one thing she had always relied on, her ability to control how people perceived her, was gone. And through it all, Elena remained silent. She didn't post, didn't tweet. She didn't need to. Her silence had spoken clearly enough the moment she picked up the dress, the moment she stood still under that soft lighting while a system tried to erase her. Jasmine declined interviews. Emily didn't make a video. But the world didn't stop asking. Because what they had started wasn't just a conversation, it was a crack. And that crack was spreading across the glass walls of every boutique that had ever built its brand on exclusion. And Francesca? She stayed quiet too. Her name disappeared from the company site 2 days later. A change in leadership email went out to the press. A luxury trade journal reported that she had resigned for personal reasons. But the comments below the article told a different story. She didn't resign, she was revealed. And far from the noise, far from the retweets, the debates, the headlines, Elena sat in a quiet room, designing again, her hands sketching curves, corners, textures, the kind of work that doesn't need to scream to be seen, because now the world had finally seen her, not because of what she wore, not because of who she knew, but because for once someone stayed still long enough to see past the surface. And listen, respect as luxury wasn't just a trend, it was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. A week passed, the headlines quieted, the hashtags slowed, but what remained was the echo. And then one morning, Elena received an envelope. No return address, just her name, handwritten in elegant, looping cursive, the kind of writing that belonged to a different generation, one raised on stationery and apologies too late to matter. She stood in the doorway of her apartment, the morning light spilling across the tile, coffee still steaming in her hand. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she opened it. Inside was thick cream-colored paper, monogrammed with the initials FD. The handwriting matched the envelope. Neat, careful, too careful. The kind of careful that comes from fear or guilt. Elena, I debated whether I had the right to write you this. I still don't know if I do, but I need to try. What I did, how I treated you, was wrong. There's no policy, no training manual, no boutique standard that can excuse it. The truth is uglier than that. The truth is, I saw you, and I saw myself. When I was younger, I didn't belong in places like Le Diamant. I was invisible, overlooked, dismissed, and instead of growing out of that pain, I turned it into armor. I became the kind of woman I used to fear, cold, controlled, unshakable. I thought if I could judge others faster than they judged me, I would finally be safe. I wasn't. And when you walked in, confident without performing, powerful without announcing it, I didn't see a customer. I saw a threat to everything I built my identity around. I can't take back what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know. You reminded me who I used to be and who I never should have become. Francesca. Elena read it twice, not because she needed to, but because something about it felt unreal. There was no spin, no corporate tone, no plea for sympathy. It was raw and messy and human. The kind of letter you don't write unless something inside you has already started to break. She placed it gently on the table and sat down, exhaling slowly, her fingers steepled in front of her mouth. The silence in the room felt different now, not heavy, but full of weight. The kind that asked for reflection, not reaction. 10 minutes later, Jasmine walked in with 2 coffees and the morning paper under her arm. Still viral, she muttered, tossing the paper on the counter. Apparently they're calling you the Queen of Quiet Resistance. She grinned, then looked up and caught the expression on Elena's face. The grin faded. What happened? Elena slid the letter across the table without saying a word. Jasmine picked it up, read it slowly, all the way through. Her eyes didn't narrow, her lips didn't curl. She read it like a lawyer reads a testimony, listening for the cracks beneath the words. When she finished, she laid it down beside her untouched coffee and leaned back in the chair. For a long beat, they said nothing. Then Jasmine asked, voice low, calm but direct, "Are you going to forgive her?" Elena looked out the window. The city was alive as ever. Cars rushing, people moving, the world forgetting. But she hadn't. Not yet. Not entirely. Her fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup before she answered. "Forgiveness doesn't change the past," she said, voice steady. "But it opens the door to the future." Jasmine didn't blink. "And you're ready to open that door?" "I'm not opening it for her," Elena said. "I'm opening it for me." The words didn't come from pride or pity. They came from something deeper, something harder earned. The understanding that dignity was not just what others gave you, but what you refused to let them take. Jasmine nodded slowly. "You're better than me," she said, but there was no bitterness in it, just respect. "No," Elena replied. "I'm just done carrying her mistake on my shoulders." Outside, a delivery van honked at a cyclist. Somewhere down the street, music played from an open cafe door. Life didn't pause for moral victories. It didn't hand out medals. But in that small kitchen, over 2 cups of cooling coffee and a single folded letter, something settled between them. Not closure, but clarity. Elena stood and walked to the window. The boutique was still open, rebranded, repainted, now with a new name and a new manager. But the truth lived online forever. And more importantly, it had lived in the people who watched, who recognized themselves in her silence, in Jasmine's fire, in Emily's quiet rebellion. Elena turned back to the table, picked up the letter one last time, and folded it neatly. She didn't throw it away. She didn't frame it. She just placed it in a drawer and closed it, like a chapter that no longer needed reading. Jasmine lifted her coffee and raised it slightly. "To the next room," she said. Elena smiled. "To the next room," she echoed. And this time, they were walking in together. No labels, no armor, no need for permission, just presence and power and peace. Some stories end in silence, but not this one. This one stepped back into the light on its own terms. 3 months later, on a sunlit corner in downtown Los Angeles, a new name appeared on glass. More. No tagline. No gold accents. Just clean lines, warm light, and one message etched into the front door in small serif letters. Everyone belongs. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no step-and-repeat wall, no fashion show dressed in pretense. Elena didn't need spectacle. What she had built was the opposite of Le Diamant in every way. Her new showroom was not guarded by velvet ropes or security disguised as stylists. There were no dress codes, no forced whispers, no rules that whispered, "You should be grateful we let you in." Instead, there was music, soft, live piano on weekends. There was fresh coffee at the front. There was space to move, breathe, ask, exist. And the people came. Not just designers, architects, or industry elites. People came in jeans. People came in scrubs and uniforms and vintage jackets and canvas shoes. They came alone, with friends, with families. And no one looked at their shoes before saying hello. Because in this place, dignity was not earned through appearance. It was already yours when you walked in. At the heart of it all stood Emily, now the director of operations. No longer an intern, no longer a shadow. She walked the floor with a tablet in one hand, greeting guests by name, listening, adjusting, always alert, but never judging. She had helped write the training manual herself. First line, "Kindness is not a brand value, it's a requirement." Her old name tag from Le Diamant sat in a frame above her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how close she'd come to becoming someone she wasn't, of the day she said no, of the day she said enough. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across polished concrete floors and a group of teenage design students explored the space in awe, Emily stood by the front desk and smiled. She watched a young woman in a hoodie ask questions about textile sourcing, and a man in steel-toe boots sketching something in a notebook beside a display table. This room, this energy, was the world she had once only imagined. Now she was running it. And Elena? She was everywhere. She didn't walk the floor like a queen. She moved through the showroom like part of the design itself. A gentle presence, quiet, observant. She didn't need to speak loudly anymore. Her work had learned how to speak for itself. When clients came in expecting exclusivity, she greeted them with openness. And when they left surprised by how they felt, not judged but seen, she considered that a success greater than any luxury headline could offer. She didn't hang press articles on the walls. There were many praising her redefinition of luxury, her bold rejection of status-based service, her architectural innovations, but she kept them stored in a drawer. This space wasn't for her past. It was for what came next. And at the center of that future stood one woman who had never stopped fighting for others. Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine didn't stay in the boutique story. She carried its spark into something larger, something lasting. She now served as legal advisor to the Morena Project, a nonprofit initiative named in honor of Jasmine's grandmother, a hotel maid who'd once been fired for looking tired in front of guests. The project focused on training, empowering, and legally protecting women in the service industry who had experienced discrimination based on race, appearance, or class. It offered free legal clinics, press support, and advocacy training. Jasmine led the first workshop herself, standing in front of a group of women in a borrowed community center with rolled-up sleeves and fire in her voice. There are places that will try to shrink you, she told them. Places that will try to make you invisible unless you look like what they expect. And when that happens, you don't ask for a seat, you build the damn table. Word spread. Articles followed. Donations poured in. Even former critics stepped forward, acknowledging something had changed. Jasmine didn't just help Elena. She had sparked a legal and cultural movement that was forcing businesses, brands, and boardrooms to look hard at the way they equated luxury with exclusion. And she wasn't slowing down. Back at the showroom, Elena met with Jasmine weekly. Sometimes it was to consult on community partnerships. Sometimes it was just for coffee and reflection. One Thursday afternoon, as the sky turned gold outside the showroom's wide windows, the two women sat in the upper loft office overlooking the space below. Jasmine leaned on the railing, watching a mother and daughter walk hand in hand through the display area. "You realize what you did, right?" she said quietly. "You didn't just build a showroom, you built a reset button." Elena smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." Jasmine turned, her gaze warm but sharp. "No, you didn't, but you were the first one through the door." Elena looked down at the open floor below. No pedestals, no velvet ropes, just people, ideas, curiosity, and space to be human. "The world told me I needed to dress a certain way to be respected," Elena said, her voice almost a whisper. "Turns out I just needed to stop asking for permission." The door below opened. A young man in a delivery uniform stepped in, nervously holding a worn-out notebook. Emily met him at the front with a smile, not asking why he was there, but how she could help. Jasmine watched it all happen, arms folded. "You know," she said, "if someone had told me that a moment of humiliation in a boutique would lead to all this, I wouldn't have believed them." Elena didn't look away from the floor. "It didn't lead to it," she said. "It revealed it. We didn't create something new. We just made space for what should have always been there." Outside, traffic passed. People walked by without knowing they were steps away from a revolution disguised as a showroom. But inside, change wasn't being declared. It was being lived, quietly, boldly. Every hour the doors stayed open. Every time someone felt safe to ask. Every time someone walked out feeling worthy, not because of what they wore, but because they were treated like they mattered. That was the new definition of luxury. And Elena, Jasmine, and Emily had written it together. Not in gold foil, but in courage. As the sun dipped below the skyline and the lights inside Moore dimmed to their evening glow, something settled in the air. Not quiet, not stillness, but permanence. The kind of energy that lingers long after the doors close. Downstairs, the last client of the day stepped out. A woman in paint-splattered overalls holding a color swatch like a treasure. She hadn't been rushed. She hadn't been judged. She had been welcomed. Emily locked the front door behind her, then stood for a moment with her palm against the cool glass. She didn't look tired. She looked full, of purpose, of pride, of something she once thought belonged only to people who wore name tags with other people's logos. Upstairs, Elena stood alone in her studio. The city lights stretched out beyond the window, flickering like pixels on a broken screen. She held a pencil in one hand and a sketch pad in the other. But for once, she wasn't drawing. She was remembering. That day, that store, that voice wrapped in silk telling her what she couldn't wear. That slow, bitter taste of being erased in real time. But instead of letting it harden her, she had done the unthinkable. She had built something better. Not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough just by walking through a door. The memory still stung, but it no longer controlled her. That was the difference. That was the victory no headline could print. Across town, Jasmine Crockett stood before a packed auditorium of young law students. Her blazer hung over her shoulder. She didn't pace. She didn't posture. She stood still. Her voice alone did the moving. She told them the story not as gossip, not as spectacle, but as evidence of what happens when a system forgets its humanity, of how law isn't written only in codes and clauses, but in moments, in choices, in what you allow to happen in front of you without speaking. And the woman they ignored, Jasmine said, her voice slow and full of fire, is the same woman who now signs the front of a business card the industry once refused to hand her. The auditorium fell silent. No applause. Just the deep, stunned stillness of people learning where real power begins. Later that night, the streets emptied. The city exhaled. Somewhere, a new showroom opened. Somewhere else, an old one quietly closed. Francesca was gone from the headlines now, but not forgotten. Not by those she hurt, not by those who watched, not by those who finally had the words to name what they had felt for years. Disrespect, disguised as elegance. Prejudice, disguised as preference. But that wasn't the story that remained. It wasn't the pain that lasted. It was what came after. A woman once judged for her sneakers now consulted luxury brands on customer experience. A young intern once told to stay professional now trained teams on emotional intelligence. And a lawyer once called too loud in courtrooms now rewrote policies for national hospitality chains. They didn't break the system. They just stopped letting it break them. And in that quiet, steady defiance, something new was born. Not loud, not gold-plated, not reserved for the chosen few, just real. So maybe that's where the story ends. Not in fire, not in fury, but in presence. In the way someone now walks into a room and feels no need to prove they belong. In the way a receptionist greets a janitor the same way they greet a CEO. In the way a young girl sees someone who looks like her own mother owning the space instead of cleaning it. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply make room for everyone. And in the end, one truth remains. Real luxury doesn't need to impress. It only needs to leave something behind. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.